I'm not usually one to get sucked up into the hype surrounding the latest game release. Typically, I'm a pretty skeptical kind of guy who isn't willing to drop his $60 on a product without doing my research. And I consider myself to be a fairly well-informed consumer. But every now and then, a game comes along. For one reason or another, it gets me really excited. Maybe it's from a developer that I really like and trust. Or maybe it shows a lot of creativity with unique and fresh ideas, or even looks like it represents some true flash of vision and artistry in an industry that is becoming increasingly cynical and bogged down with rampant greed and shady business practices. And it seems like every time that this happens, it ends with disappointment. With me getting burned and feeling stupid for putting my faith into people who, more and more, are proving themselves unworthy of that faith. As much as it pains me to say it, they got me again. They got me real good this time, guys. Sea of Thieves should have been a great game. It should have been a return to form for one of the industry's most beloved veteran studios. An open-world, multiplayer pirate game where you and 3 friends man a boat and sail around going on adventures, skirmishing with other crews of players. A game about exploration and teamwork and excitement and wonder and, most importantly, fun. Sea of Thieves doesn't take itself too seriously. It's got a cartoony art style, and it lets you do silly things like launch yourself out of cannons or get blackout drunk and puke all over your friend's face. It's easy to jump into and play, but it doesn't hold your hand like so many modern games do, allowing you to get truly immersed into the game world. You work the boat just like you would in real life, raising and angling the sails to catch the wind, and you sail around from island to island, organically running into other players, solving pirate riddles and digging up treasure. It's made by Rare, the fan-favorite studio behind a number of classics whose talent has been criminally wasted in recent years working on Connect shovelware. Plus, it has the full backing of Microsoft, who desperately needed a killer app for their exclusive deprived Xbox One system. So with all that going for it, Sea of Thieves surely had to be the hit that everyone wanted it to be, right? Right? Well, wrong. I remember playing the beta test and thinking to myself, wow, they really have a good base here. These mechanics will all make for a great platform to build an amazing game off of. I can't wait to see what cool stuff they have lined up for the full game. Well, launch day came and went, and we quickly realized that what we saw in the beta was pretty much all the game had to offer. There was no customization for either your character or your ship. There were only the 3 factions handing out shallow, repetitive quests, only one enemy type, one lackluster boss, unexciting cosmetic options that cost a ludicrous amount of gold to unlock, and your rank in the 3 factions only unlocked more of the same quests and the ability to purchase additional cosmetic items. It's not even that there was no endgame to work towards. There was no beginning game. There was hardly a game at all. Something is happening with big-budget AAA games, where we are continually seeing games released that clearly have potential, and with a little more work put into them, could be phenomenal experiences, but are put out in a state where they just don't have enough in them to warrant their price, thus squandering their all-too-important first impressions and basically dooming an otherwise promising game to a downward spiral of playing catch-up to players' expectations, going through development right before our eyes and treating us as glorified playtesters, except instead of them paying us, we are the ones paying for the privilege. I refuse to believe that these professional developers honestly think that these games are in any way ready to be commercially released as a full product, or that they just can't think of anything else to put into them. We've seen developers who have proven that they know how to make great games with love and effort put into them, yet for some reason release these lazy, hollow frameworks of games and expect us to pay full price for them, and then also charge us for microtransactions and DLC on top of that. Now, there are a lot of things that you could point to as being the reason for this, but that would take more time than we have to discuss, and it's not really what this video is about. Maybe we'll talk about that another time, but today I want to focus specifically on Sea of Thieves. I generally try to be kind of a positive person, So, I don't want to just sit here and complain about all the game's problems, but there are plenty of other videos out there that do that if that's all you want. Today, I'd like to examine the problems with Sea of Thieves and then offer what I believe to be possible solutions to those problems. Because I really do think that this game has potential and could totally be reworked into something great without needing to completely redo all the work they've done up to this point. Now, of course, I need to point out I am in no way a professional game designer. I'm just a guy that loves video games and wants to see the full potential of this game realized. I've sat down and thought long and hard about why Sea of Thieves doesn't work, and what it needs to change or add to make it better. So with that lengthy preamble out of the way, these are my suggestions about how to fix Sea of Thieves. The very first thing that jumped out at me upon starting Sea of Thieves was how there is no character creator. In most other games with a large focus on personal customization and dressing up your character, you're able to make your own unique avatar. Typically this is done through some kind of menu where you get to choose attributes about your character like skin color, height, body type, facial features, and all that good stuff. But for some reason Sea of Thieves decides instead to give you a collection of randomly generated characters that you get to choose from. Why? If you have this system to tweak the look of the characters around, why not let players do it for themselves? Something as simple as having people design their own characters goes a long way in getting them invested in the game and immersed in the world. In this game that obviously wants the player to get sucked into the atmosphere and to care about their avatar, I honestly can't think of why you would make this a feature. And unfortunately, that lack of creative freedom extends into the equipable cosmetic items as well. You get a selection of pants, shirts, shoes, and jackets that all look pretty similar to one another, and none of them really stand out. Maybe some of you think that these look really cool, but it seems to me like all the characters end up looking almost exactly the same. You have a number of different hairstyles that, again, don't seem very unique, and you can't even choose their color, and you have 8 different gloves to choose from, but I mean, they're all just gloves. They look pretty much the same. You probably wouldn't even be able to tell one design from the other when looking at a player that's moving around or is at even a moderate distance. The choice here is basically just whether you want to wear gloves or not, and the actual type of glove doesn't really matter. Similarly, you have 4 different styles of hats that each have 2 different color variations, and then you have the option to wear an eye patch, bag leg, and hook. Just like with the other types of items, pretty much every single variation of these items is largely indistinguishable from one another. So it looks like you have all these options, but really it boils down to a binary choice. Do you want to wear a coat? Yes or no. Do you want a peg leg? Yes or no. And so on and so forth. Not to mention that there's no tattoos or scars or anything like that. Why didn't they really go all out on these items? Like I said earlier, this game isn't overly concerned with realism, so you actually have a lot of room to get creative here. Why are all the peg legs literally just straight pieces of wood? What about one that's the shin from a skeleton or is like a tentacle or something? Why can't I have a sword or a shovel for a leg? It doesn't even have to function, it could just be there for looks. Or maybe a wooden leg that's carved and painted, like it's made to look like a mermaid or a skeleton is holding me up. Or even something as simple as just a spiral or a Roman column or anything. Just something that shows that they thought about it for even a little bit. Where are the hooks that are tridents or tongs or anything besides just a typical curved hook? Why not let people put on something silly like a spoon or a corkscrew or a skeleton hand? If these items aren't going to affect gameplay, you need to make them more interesting in order to make people want to purchase them. In fact, why not get really stupid and weird with it and just let me have 2 peg legs, 2 hooks, 2 eye patches? Why limit me to just one of each? Because it's unrealistic? Screw realism, I want to have fun. You know what? I want peg hands and hook feet. It would be a hell of a lot more interesting than what they have now. And let's get some color into here while we're at it. Let me have bright neon pink hair if I want to. Or how about just let me choose a hair color in the first place? Alright, well, why don't we start there? Considering that these cosmetic items are literally the only thing that you can buy with your gold, It is mind-blowing to me that they didn't bother to make more unique or creative options for you. And yes, that's right. This is all you can buy, because there is no progression system at all in this game. There are no upgrades or more powerful items for you to work towards. Upon logging into the game for the first time, you have every weapon and ability that there is. There are 3 different guns and a sword, and that's about it. And you can only hold 2 of them at a time. This is, I feel, the first major problem that Sea of Thieves has that may take a little more work to fix. I'm not usually the kind of person who needs a constant trail of incentives to play a game. I generally feel that if the core game is fun, it doesn't need a million unlocks, and typically I find the reward treadmill that some games like Call of Duty put you on to be kind of tedious, but when your starting gear is this bare bones, you need something to add to it. It's also important for a loot-driven game to have lots of desirable items to work towards, and earning upgrades along the way gives the player a sense of progression and accomplishment. It makes them feel like they're doing something productive instead of just wasting their time. And there are so many different upgrades they could implement. I mean, the most obvious ones would be health increases or more weapon slots or the ability to carry more ammo. I'm going to say that one. The ability to carry more ammo. These could be one-time purchases from vendors, or maybe rewards for getting higher ranks in the factions. How about being able to upgrade your swim speed, or jump height, or the amount of bananas and cannonballs you can hold? You could also put in more creative abilities, like maybe you recover a bit of health whenever you kill an enemy, or getting some kind of buff when you're the last member of your crew left alive, or maybe whenever you get hit, you automatically damage all enemies around you. You could even treat these abilities like perks or something, and only be able to equip a certain number of them at a time. Hey, maybe the number of ability slots is something else you could upgrade. And there needs to be more weapons. There just needs to be more. Right? How about different swords that have different melee ranges, but the ones that reach further do less damage? Or maybe some swords hurt more, but they swing slower? You could give some weapons a parry window instead of blocking for even more variety. And you could do the same thing with guns, having some that are more powerful but hold less bullets, maybe some guns shoot further than others, or even have elemental damage or something. You could also have pouches of ammo that you equip in a weapon slot, and they give you additional bullets. I don't know. These are just the most basic kind of weapon variations you see in every game, and I don't know how they released this game without any of this stuff in there. Another obvious sore spot for progression is with the ship themselves. Given that this is a game built almost entirely around the mechanics of sailing a ship, you might be forgiven for thinking that there would be a number of different ships that you can sail, each with their own quirks and features, when in reality there are only 2. Well, sort of. There's really only one, the galleon. And then there's the sloop, which only exists for solo players because it's not practical for a single person to perform all the necessary actions to sail a larger ship by themselves. And as a small tangent here, I love single-player experiences as much as the next guy. Probably even more, actually. But this is a situation where the game really doesn't work in any context other than multiplayer. All of the game's major mechanics were obviously designed with 4 players in mind, and it's completely not worth playing the game alone. As the game is right now, the sloop serves no point and should not exist. That leaves us, as I said, with only the galleon. And just like with your character, the ship itself only has cosmetic unlocks. What would be great is if at the start of the game, your crew gets a dinky sloop-sized ship and has to save up a bunch of gold to buy bigger and better ship types. And just like with the characters, there are plenty of upgrades that you could implement. Let's say the basic ship starts off with a set of sails, 2 or 3 cannons, map table, and some barrels for storage, and that's it. And you could go to a shipmaster NPC on the outpost, who can install new rooms and features on your ship, like additional cannons and barrels, a brig, grog barrel, weapons and clothing chests, captain's quarter with a bed, maybe where you could rest and heal for free, thicker holes that are harder to pierce, a pointed bowsprit that does more damage when ramming other ships, and so on. Maybe you could even get like a small rowboat that hangs off your deck, and you can lower into the water so you don't have to slowly swim back and forth between your ship and all the islands. And obviously, the bigger your base ship, the more room you have for these additional upgrades. If you really wanted to go all out with this ship customization, imagine some kind of custom layout system, almost like Fallout 4 had with its settlement building. Like, okay, when talking to the shipmaster, you could enter a mode where you move around the elements of your ship. So you could choose the position of your cannons, for instance. Maybe position some facing forward, or perhaps put some below deck. You know those little hatches on the side of the ship? Yeah, those are called gun ports, and as you probably guessed, real-life pirates poked cannons through them to fire at other ships without exposing themselves. So by putting cannons down there, your crew is more protected, but they take up space that could otherwise be used for other areas that can only be installed below deck. Giving the ship this kind of meaningful personalization would actually make the player feel more of a personal attachment to it. It would make the ship battles much more interesting and risky, as you don't know what your opponent's ship could be capable of at first sight. Not to mention, it would give the players extra incentive to keep their ship from sinking, since they put so much work into it. They would naturally be more protective of it. I mean, of course, they'd be even more so if there were ever anything valuable on board for more than a minute or two that they could possibly lose. Speaking of which, basically, the only real loot in this pirate sim, which is ostensibly about looting and plundering, is just the chests and the skulls. All the other stuff, like the bananas, planks, and cannonballs, are basically just lying around for free, so you can never really get excited about finding them. And this is, again, a major issue that will require a fundamental redesign of the game's mechanics, or at the very least, the addition of new mechanics in order to fix. Perhaps the most romanticized aspects of pirates is the vast amount of loot and goods that they plunder. They steal everything that isn't nailed down and jealously hoard their booty. They're obsessed with jewels and gold and treasure. So then, why? Why in the world are the only treasure items chests and skulls? You don't even open the chest, you just sell them. And since your gold is always stored on your person and can never be taken from you, these items are the only thing you can steal from other players. And the problem with that is that the majority of time, since bailing, you won't even have any chests or skulls on board. I mean, why would you? You would always want to immediately go back to an outpost and sell it as soon as possible. And since missions usually take place nearby to the outpost they were given on, there's maybe a 3 to 5 minute window where you have to be careful, but outside of that, you really don't have anything to lose. Sea of Thieves is a game about stealing with nothing to steal. Real-life pirates traded in a huge amount of different goods that could be put into the game. You can find chests of silk and spices and things, but like I said, you don't actually open the chests. They just serve the same function as all the other chests. Why isn't there like an entire economy where at Outpost you could buy and sell different types of goods like spices, textiles, salt, tobacco, grain, wood, ivory, alcohol, and every outpost could have different prices for all these that are constantly in flux. You could actually make a valid playstyle out of just being a trader, buying as low as you can and selling high. If you wanted to, you could even make it so that the buy and sell prices of directly adjacent outposts never have too big a gap between them, forcing the player to make long-distance voyages to make the most profits. This would also make use of your ship's new upgradable storage space. And if you need to look around from outpost to outpost to find the best deals, that means you're spending more time with cargo loaded on your boat, which not only gives players something valuable to loot off of other ships, but also introduces an element of risk management. You could sell all your goods at this closest outpost for not a lot of money, or you could venture to a further market for a lot more gold, but risk getting plundered along the way. Another important component for a well-functioning economy is that your trade goods provide utility and that they can be consumed. This is actually something a lot of games for some reason ignore, but for something to have value, it generally needs to be able to be used for something. In most games, goods are just valuable because developers say so. They don't actually do anything. In reality, they're just another form of currency in an abstraction of an economic model. But what if, instead of that, we actually tried to simulate goods and trade? What if we could give a non-monetary purpose to all those items so that even just the decision to sell them becomes something the player needs to think about? If these items could have a gameplay function in addition to being worth gold, it would go that much further towards making them something desirable and simulating the actual flow of goods while also making the gameplay more varied. For instance, what if your sails could be damaged just like your hull? Then you would need to use fabric to patch them up again, or else your movement is impaired or even halted. And maybe you could use the salt and spices to cook up meals in your galley, which by the way could be another upgrade for your ship. And then those meals could give you various buffs depending on their ingredients. The booze obviously you would drink, and the bananas, wood planks, and cannibals already have a gameplay purpose, so for them we just need to make them more scarce, which means not spawning them in vast quantities on deserted islands. And hey, what if to get the really cool and powerful items, you need not only gold, but also some materials, like needing to give the vendors some silk for them to make you fancy clothing, or ivory to inlay into weapons. We could take this idea an extra step and perhaps allow the players to gather certain resources out in the world. What if when you kill an animal, instead of it giving you nothing, it could give you something? Like a pelt that could either be sold, traded, or used to make items. Imagine having a shark skin coat, or snake skin boots, or some kind of cape made from parrot feathers. Maybe you could even make like a chicken hat or something. Overall, we just need more things to loot. We need more things to have. A game having a mechanic where others can steal from you is only impactful if you have things you're afraid of losing. Not only would doing all of this flesh out the gameplay a little more, it would finally give players a reason to fight other ships besides griefing, and it would be even more incentive not to let your ship sink because you're carrying around all this valuable stuff. And if that's not enough to motivate you to protect your ship with your life, well, there's always more we could do to make death a scary prospect. As it is now, there's absolutely no repercussions for either your character dying or your ship sinking into the briny deep. Rare had recently said that they planned to implement a gold cost to respawning, but not long after they walked that back due to complaints from the community. I agree that just taking gold from players for every death is a bit much, but there does need to be some sort of penalty. It's not uncommon to see players intentionally kill themselves to quickly respawn on their ship, rather than taking the time to walk back, because it's faster and has no negative effects, so why not? Similarly, people are purposefully sinking their own ships as a form of fast travel to the outposts. Somehow, I doubt that this is the way Rare intended the game to be played. Another issue is that sometimes respawning can be too fast. Ship battles can often stretch out to unreasonable lengths of time, as neither side can kill the other fast enough to completely defeat them. And with no punishment for death, each side just keeps respawning indefinitely until one of their crew runs out of planks to repair their ship and they sink. Adding the right kind of death mechanic would be able to get these two birds stoned at once. What if, for instance, there was a gold cost associated with respawning, but it was optional? Now let me explain. When you die, you would still appear on the Ferry of the Damned like you do now, but instead of it being completely empty, Davy Jones himself is there guarding the door. He'll only let you back into the world of the living if you pay him a substantial fee. But the longer you stay on the ferry, the lower and lower that fee gets. Eventually, after a minute or two, the cost goes down to zero and you can respawn for free. This would effectively mean that the player has a choice about how they're being punished. They either pay a hefty fine or have to wait for a longer time to get back into the action. It also creates a dynamic element of risk management. If the player dies in a closely matched battle, and his crewmates are on the verge of losing, they may be tempted to spend some money to revive themselves early and possibly turn the fight back in their favor. At the same time, they may decide that the fight's not worth the potential lost resources and cut their losses instead. And needless to say, unlike now, losing this gold would actually be impactful because it has a tangible impact in its use in purchasing upgrades. So that takes care of player deaths, but what about the ship? There is the current penalty of losing all chests and skulls aboard, but the problem with that is that almost 90% of the time you aren't going to have any of those items on your ship, because as soon as you get them, you immediately beeline to the nearest outpost to sell them. So this really doesn't do anything most of the time. To remedy this, imagine if when your crew respawns at an outpost, your ship is docked by the shipmaster, but it's still wrecked. The paint is peeled and the mast is broken and you can't work the sails or the anchor, and in order to fix it you need to talk to the shipmaster and either pay him to repair it or do a quick mission for him. The mission would either take place on the island, if the outpost itself is big enough, or he'll lend you a small basic ship to sail to another nearby island. The amount of gold you have to pay or the difficulty of the mission would depend on how upgraded your ship is. And of course, you would be able to pool your money together across all your crew members to more easily afford the cost of repair. This would give some real weight to ship battles, as there are real stakes and players actually have something to lose. And maybe you're thinking that that's a bit too harsh, and you may be right. Maybe instead your ship has a persistent health that lowers every time your ship wrecks, and upon every wreck it would get visibly beat up, with a bunch of scratches and planks sticking out and stuff, and it's only after a certain number of shipwrecks that your ship becomes unusable and you have to pay to have it fixed. But my point is that you need some kind of consequence for failure. It's a fundamental part of game design. If the player isn't incentivized to play well, then it cheapens all of their accomplishments. They need to feel like they're accomplishing something significant, otherwise they'll just get bored and stop playing. People want to feel like they're outplaying the game, because improving a skill and overcoming a challenge is inherently satisfying. Now, all video games, especially modern AAA games, are designed to be beaten. The developer wants the player to succeed, but they need to maintain the possibility for failure in order to create the illusion of overcoming the odds. It's a classic case of the carrot and the stick. Now, Sea of Thieves may be a little bit different since its best content is PvP, so obviously it can't be designed for every player to win every engagement, but you still need that balance of both negative and positive reinforcement. It may seem tempting not to punish players for losing to other players so that they don't feel like they've lost, but doing so simultaneously robs the victorious player of any feeling of having won. If their defeated foe doesn't lose anything, and they don't gain anything, then what have they even accomplished? Winning and losing are a package deal. If you remove one, you get rid of the other. And no one wants to play a game they can't win. So, with actually meaningful consequences for ship battles, we can start to craft a set of mechanics and situations to facilitate interesting interactions between players. In the current game, virtually every encounter with other players is always going to play out the exact same way. As soon as you see each other, you'll either run away or immediately start fighting. Because you all have the exact same equipment, all the battles will feel remarkably similar to each other. And even if you come out on top, the enemy crew will just respawn at the nearest outpost and can sail right back to where they were in a few minutes. So unless you quickly run away right after killing them, they're just going to come right back and fight you again. If you go to an island to do a quest and run into another crew, even after defeating them, they'll continue to come back over and over again to harass you as long as you're on or around that island. It becomes a battle of attrition as they constantly wear down your supplies, and each time you kill them, they get to restock their supplies, so eventually they will overwhelm you. And remember, enemy players almost never have any valuable treasure on them, because if they did, they would bring it immediately to an outpost. The most you'll typically get from other ships is just some bananas, cannonballs, and planks, which are so plentiful in the world that you would never want to attack other players just for those reasons. In fact, the biggest thing that uses up those supplies is fighting other ships. So you would have to use those items just to get more of the exact same things. What all this leads to is an environment of hostility and frustration, where fighting other players is both the most exciting thing in the game, but also completely pointless. PvP is a random, chaotic, and unorganized mess. It drives people to the point where the only reason to engage others is to grief and harass them. I've actually seen people board a single-player sloop and kill them, then wait for them to respawn on board just so they can kill him again. They purposely leave the ship intact so he keeps coming back, and can use his own armory to indefinitely resupply themselves with bullets. This continues until they get bored or he rage quits. Obviously, something needs to change here. We need to shape player interactions to discourage that kind of toxic behavior and encourage more structured, positive behavior. Instead of just having players always fight each other immediately upon seeing one another, imagine if we could create situations where they might have reasons to cooperate with each other, or allow them to trade with each other, or even just let them interact in any way other than fighting. My idea for doing this is to introduce a new mechanic that at the same time makes use of a famous pirate element that is inexplicably ignored in Sea of Thieves, the Jolly Roger. What if you could actually change that flag at the top of your crow's nest? Depending on what colors you're flying, your interactions with other players could change. For instance, what if by raising a white flag, you automatically become friendly to all other crews also flying a white flag? So you're unable to damage either crew members or their ships, and you wouldn't be able to pick up anything from their ships. This means that if you see another ship with a white flag, you know immediately that they're not a threat, because they literally can't hurt you, and are free to have more peaceful interactions with them. Conversely, anyone with a Jolly Roger raised is hostile to all other ships, and can attack or be attacked by crews no matter what their flags are. By allowing players to announce their intentions, they can immediately identify friends and foes. Of course, for players to want to be friends with other players, they would need to have a reason to do so. So instead of just being able to fight and steal from other players, they should have the ability to trade items and loot. Obviously, this presupposes that we have already put in all those new upgrades and items discussed earlier. So imagine that there was some kind of system where members from each crew can place items or gold on the other ship's deck, and if both crews all agree on the deal, then ownership of the item switches over, and they're now pick-upable by the other crew. And if you try to sail away with another crew's items on your deck, they would just warp back to the other ship after you got a certain distance away to ensure that these things can't be stolen. And obviously there needs to be something stopping crews from flying a white flag to lure in other ships and then putting up a black one at the last second and attacking. So the process of raising and lowering the flag should take a little while, kind of like raising the anchor. And while you have no flag atop your mast, your crew members can't attack any other players, but can be attacked by others no matter what their flag is. We could make this system even more complex by introducing faction-specific flags as well. Let crews pledge loyalty to specific factions for extra missions and rewards, but it replaces their white flag with a colored one that makes them friendly to other people flying the same faction flag. Crews with white flags would still be friendly to all colored flags, while the Jolly Roger is still hostile to all flags. And why stop at just trading? Why not let crews make alliances with each other? What if there were bigger, more difficult missions that would require more people to be easily completed? Or what if there was like a giant kraken, one that actually was a big threat and you need multiple ships to take down? What if you could race other ships around an island or to and from islands? Or maybe you could make bets and wagers with other crew about who can find the most loot on a particular item in a given time. Maybe there could be like duels between players where you could bet gold and items on the outcome. There could even be a special mode where the combatants have to get drunk first. The more constructive, friendly activities you allow the players to engage in, the stronger the sense of community will become. It will foster a positive environment where negativity has less room to grow and fester. There will always be tons of people who just go around being jerks no matter what option they have. In fact, it's kind of one of the main ideas the game is built around. But right now, a lot of people are engaging in those kinds of toxic behaviors simply because they're bored. The biggest problem you hear people complaining about, the main problem with Sea of Thieves, is that there just isn't enough to do. That's really all people want, and fixing it is the only way to salvage this game. With that in mind, we need to examine the main gameplay loop and rework it to be as fun as possible. One of the biggest selling points about Sea of Thieves was the sense of adventure. Rare and Microsoft promised us a world of exploration. Set sail upon a vast open ocean, venturing into new regions and discovering the secrets of unspoiled islands and sunken ships. Hunt for treasure by following maps and untangling riddles, and learn to expect the unexpected. But unfortunately, the expected is exactly what we got. Some might argue that we got even less. The only real quests in the game are given out by 3 factions, and are all variations of the same thing. You go to an island, you collect something either by digging, capturing an animal, or fighting an enemy, you go back to the outpost, you sell whatever it is you collected. Wash, rinse, repeat, ad nauseum. Emphasis on the nauseum. The most interesting missions are probably fighting the skeletons because they come in a couple different varieties, but it still gets old real quick. In all the trailers and pre-release footage, they kept showing off quests where the players would have to solve riddles and puzzles to find where the chests are buried, and those quests are in the game, but only become available after you've raised your reputation with the factions by grinding through a gauntlet of the earlier, mind-numbing, repetitive quests. And by then it's far too little too late. And as far as I can tell, these advanced quests seem to be the only content in the game that the developers actually handcrafted. All the rest of the missions are, I'm pretty sure, randomly generated. They just place an object randomly on a nearby island and tell you to go there. For interesting content, you need more than that. You need quests that have thought and effort put into them, and that are intelligently designed and tell their own little stories. All the missions that are currently in the game feel like filler, and that's what they should be. It's all they ever could be. They should be the infinitely generated side quest to give the player something extra to do in between the main missions. So how do we make main missions? The first thing I would do is give the game some kind of story. It doesn't have to be a good story or even necessarily have to be a single big story. If the game even had a bunch of little simple stories scattered throughout its world, it would be a huge improvement. You could flesh out the factions more than none at all. What are the goals of each faction? Who runs them? How do they get started? Where are they based? Each one could have a series of quests where you work to earn their trusts, maybe going to their private island headquarters and meeting high-ranking NPC members of their organization. And there could be internal conflicts within the factions where you have to pick sides or have the opportunity to double-cross certain characters. That could lead to faction-specific boss battles against tough NPCs who maybe have giant, powerful ships that are almost like big floating dungeons that you need to board and travel through the depths of. And in the end, you blow up some gunpowder barrels on the bottom deck and then have to quickly run back out while the water pours in. How exciting would that be? Speaking of dungeons, why aren't there any dungeons? Why not have quest givers hand you over a key that opens a hidden door on an island somewhere that leads to a big instanced area underground, where handcrafted scripted events could take place, like getting ambushed by special enemies or having areas with unique and complicated traps and environments. You could even have quests where one faction tells you to go attack the base or ships of another faction, so you would have to decide who you wanted to be loyal to. Maybe there could be quests where you had to find and fight some players from the other faction to sort of tie the PvP into the story. There should also be some quests that you find randomly in the world by running into NPCs. You could find an isolated hermit living alone on an island that wants rescue, run into a merchant ship that needs to be escorted across dangerous water, get flagged down by a mermaid that asks you to get rid of some fishing vessels that are hunting her people. That, in my opinion, would be the bare minimum needed to make this a finished product. Ideally, you would also have some sort of main story outside of the factions, some sort of giant quest chain working towards a long-term goal. Maybe mythical island paradise awaits you, or you want to be the pirate king, or the holy grail, or immortality, or something. Literally anything. You know what would really be cool? Some kind of endgame area that takes place at the bottom of the ocean, like in some weird pirate afterlife, and you'd still be sailing around, but there'd be another ocean above you, and everything's dark and misty and spooky. Something big like that would give players a reason to stay with the game. And in order to make all these missions interesting, you need to introduce greater enemy variety. Right now, the game has you fighting skeletons, skellingtons, skeletons, scallywags, and more skeletons. There are a few different types that have different weaknesses and strength, but they're all just skeletons. What's up with all the skeletons? Occasionally you'll get harassed by some snakes or a shark or two, but they're both pretty easy to avoid and not really that dangerous. Then there's the Kraken. Oh boy, that Kraken. The giant sea beast that was hyped up as the ultimate challenge, the final boss of the game, the random encounter that you can run into literally on your first or second voyage that's just some disembodied tentacles sticking out of the water and flailing around. Marvel as they grab you by opening up their mouths, I guess, and awkwardly causing you to kind of weirdly float through the air straight into their grasp. And then they don't really do much to you. They'll They throw you around, or sometimes they dunk you in the water, which, considering there's no actual model of the body of the Kraken, I don't know why they'd ever purposefully put you underwater, where you'd immediately figure that out. They do try to obscure it by making the water black, but you can still swim around under the tentacles where the body should be and there's nothing there. Honestly, this boss fight probably took less than 20 minutes or so to think up and design, and it feels like this is literally the first iteration of the encounter that they just playtested once and went, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine. It'll do. Since this fight is easily the most embarrassing aspect of the game, I'll start with it. Give the Kraken an actual model with a set number of tentacles. When it attacks you, it swims under the ship and wraps 2 or 3 of its arms around the ship, holding it in place and slowly damaging the hull as it squeezes it. The players have to hack at the arms holding the ship while avoiding the other tentacles as they swat at them and come crashing down on the deck. This is phase 1. After they cut off the arms wrapped around the ship, the second phase starts. The Kraken goes in front of the ship or to the side and pokes its beak out of the sea, sucking up a bunch of water and making a giant whirlpool that the ship gets stuck in. If any player falls into the water, the current pulls them into the Kraken's mouth and they get eaten. While this is happening, the Kraken periodically shoots ink up into the air that lands on the deck, damaging the players and knocking them around. It could also temporarily blind them if it gets a direct hit. Also, it would still be whacking them with its remaining arms. They have to shoot it with the guns and cannons until it dies. And when it dies, it actually gives you something. Either a ton of gold and or some specific material that can be used to make unique items. Maybe like a gun that shoots ink so it blinds players, or the tentacle peg like I talked about earlier, and other stuff like that. And add more enemy types, for God's sake. Why aren't there NPC pirates and privateers sailing around the ocean, or camped out at islands? You could even make some of them like ghost pirates that have chains hanging from them and only come out at night. You could take a page from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and make them like drowned fish people. That'd be cool. I mean, that was one of the best parts of that franchise. Or maybe there's Navy ships sailing around, and they attack people flying a black flag but leave everybody else. And why not mer people? They don't even have to be like the traditional pirate mermaids in the game now. You could make them more like Murlocs or something, and they would climb aboard your boat in the middle of the sea and start fighting you. Some of them could run below deck and start stealing things from your hold. Then they'd try to jump back into the sea with them and you gotta stop them. On islands, you could fight giant enemy crabs. You could also have some native tribes on the island, although idiots might call that racist, so I guess I can see why you didn't. In terms of other bosses, I already mentioned the giant ship, but what about a ghost ship that only appears on a full moon and can teleport around or phase in and out of existence? What about an encounter with a big fleet of ships so that you could bring other crews and have huge naval battles? How about some land-based bosses? Maybe a giant skeleton, or like a big golem made up of skeletons? Oh hey, how about the Flying Dutchman? A big ship that flies around and has ropes dangling from it that you climb onto and get on board? And this is all just stuff I came up with after thinking about it for like 5 or 10 minutes. I seriously cannot believe that a big team of professional game designers couldn't figure out something like this themselves. Maybe they did, and they just didn't put it in the game? And that really leads to the heart of the problem. Rare has said from the beginning that Sea of Thieves was going to be an evolving experience with constant updates to keep it fresh. So some people have suggested that they just purposefully held back most of the content of the game so they could dole it out to us piecemeal and make it seem like more than it really was, possibly even selling some of it to us in expansions. And if that's the case, the real question we should be asking is not whether or not the game will ever get to a state worth playing, but rather whether or not Rare even deserves the opportunity to make the game better. Keeping in mind that this is not the Rare we grew up with. This is a new Rare, made up of new people. Do we respect them and trust them to actually go forward with the primary intention of crafting a fun experience over sleazy business practices and monetization? Do we hold so little respect for ourselves that we are okay with being charged full price for about 10% of a game and being drip-fed the rest, most likely paying additional fees for parts of it? Are we really meant to believe that a team of more than 200 people took nearly 4 years to make this. What did they spend all that time on? I realize that making games is a long and arduous process. I know it's difficult, but it is their jobs. It is the career they chose to do and get paid for. And if designing games is so impossibly colossal of a task that you can't reasonably make games of this size and spectacle without stretching the experience out over several seasons and charging for extras along the way, then maybe you should just stop making those games. Maybe that business model is fundamentally unsustainable and leads to a crappy product that makes people angry at your company. Maybe start off making smaller games that don't look as pretty, but are complete experiences with fun and interesting gameplay, and then build up on top of that and see how big you can make them while still maintaining quality. And I know the video game industry is primarily a business and they want to make money, but you can make money without being a slimeball. You just make a game that people want to play and then they buy it from you. Even if you want a game that with an extended lifespan that supports itself through microtransactions, you can do that too. It is possible to make a fun and complete game that has microtransactions in it. I've seen it done before. So for my last suggestion, here's how to implement microtransactions. I didn't make it its own selection because it shouldn't be a major focus of your game, but just add in a premium currency like doubloons or something, and the high-level cosmetic items can be purchased with doubloons instead of their gold and material cost. Anything more intrusive than that starts to fundamentally change the game for the worse. It won't be as lucrative as going pay to win or adding loot boxes, but considering you're already a full-price game, you don't really deserve anything more substantial than that. I mean, you shouldn't have microtransactions in a full-price game at all, but I realize that this is the real world, and what should happen means absolutely jack shit to you. And there you have it. That's all my ideas on how to make Sea of Thieves an actual game that might be worth playing. Maybe you like these ideas, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you thought some were good and others were bad, or maybe that they were all bad. They're probably all bad. But I did all this to prove a point. I sat down for 2 or 3 hours and really thought about all these things and came up with all these ideas. And even if they don't work or need some tweaking to get right, at least they're there. At least they're actual mechanics and gameplay that can be tweaked. I mean, you need to put something in the game. That's what this whole thing comes down to. Just the idea of what if there was something instead of nothing. Even mediocre or bad content would be better than no content at all. And when you're selling a product, a full price product that people have access to right now, you can't just say that it'll be worth it eventually. You can't promise your product later, but ask to be paid now. That's called early access, and it's for projects made by people who don't have millions of dollars and the backing of one of the biggest and wealthiest corporations in the world. So that's the question I want to leave you on. Can we trust Rare? Do we want this? Are we okay with this becoming the norm? Games like this are setting a precedent of AAA games being rushed out before they're finished and cobbled together after the fact. That's what this is. This is Sea of Thieves. This is the future of AAA games. This is games as live services.